Protests are not rare in China, but many do not reach the news. They're often quickly suppressed by the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, and the country's security forces. The CCP values stability and control above all else, and protests that challenge the party's authority or call for greater freedom and rights are seen as a threat to its rule. More reason it uses force to quell protests and arrest and detain the protesters. So it's not surprising that since the beginning of the protests in Hong Kong in 2019, over 10,000 people have been arrested. These protests and how it threatened Xi Jinping's tenure are what I'll share with you in this video. So are the people of China destined to live under a regime that values control above all else, or will they rise and demand the freedoms they deserve? It's now a widely known fact that there have been a rise in the number of protests in China in recent years. People have become increasingly frustrated with the government's handling of various issues, especially the COVID lockdown. The protests rocking the country and the CCP's relentless crackdown on dissent are defining moments in the struggle for freedom and democracy in China, with the protest in Hong Kong especially putting a spotlight on their actions. Despite the risks, more and more people are taking to the streets to voice their grievances and demand change. Little wonder the year 2022 came with a lot of protests. As I mentioned earlier, the Chinese highly censor the media about protests, and I'm pretty confident the YouTube algorithm may work against this video. So before you continue watching, kindly hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. Until 2022, there has not been much unrest in China since the Tiananmen Square massacre. More on this later and its relevance to the protests in China. So what caused this tremendous political unrest in the country? The zero COVID policy did. It's no news that COVID-19 started in China and spread to many countries across the globe. In order to tackle COVID-19, the government created the zero COVID policy. It involves social distancing, mass testing, quarantines, travel restrictions, lockdown, and many more. While this was a commendable move from Xi as it helped curtail the spread of COVID and controlled it, it has now infringed on the rights of the people. It's been over 3 years and Xi has decided not to remove these restrictions melted down on the people. Many people can't work or carry out their everyday activities. Even worse, many lose their lives because of this policy. Before the November protest, something happened on the 13th of October 2022. During the prelude to the 20th National Congress of the CCP, a single protester started a protest on Sitoni Bridge. His identity is unknown and he was dressed as a construction worker. He is now dubbed as Bridge Man or Banner Man, similar to Tank Man of the Tiananmen Square protest. He created 2 banners which were posted on the bridge. He also blasted from a loudspeaker saying he wanted freedom and not the lockdowns. He wanted the treasonous dictator Xi Jinping out. His message was anti-lockdown and pro-democracy. But this was not the first time citizens demanded that Xi Jinping step down. In March 2016, an anonymous open letter accusing Xi of being a dictator and asking him to resign went around the internet. In response to this letter, some Chinese media personnel suffered for it as they got detained and their loved ones went missing. Similarly, in response to the Seton Bridge protest, the police quickly took down the banners. They censored the mention of it on social media. But it didn't end there. Instead, it fostered the goals of protesters who re-echoed the words on the banners. But the Seton's Bridge protest did not stir much uproar. The Urumqi fire did. Prequel to the fire, there were other stories of events that had played a role in triggering the people of China. First, it was the Evergrande protest, then 4 banks stole billions from their customers, and there was another protest. China also saw protests against developers and banks forcing the people to stop paying mortgages. In November, there were even more protests. On the 2nd of November, a 3-year-old boy died due to a gas leak, which sparked public anger. 3 days after that, the lockdown returned to Guangzhou, and the people had no choice but to protest again on the 15th day of that same month. As if it were not enough, there was another clash on the nights of the 22nd and 23rd of November. It was between workers at the Foxconn factory, producers of the iPhones for Apple, and the police over harmful COVID restrictions and poor pay. There was also the Chongqing Superman brother, whose quote circulated on the internet on the 24th of November. The Urumqi fire happening on the 24th of November was the final straw. But why so many protests in 1 year? Why in November? Has the CCP again broken its bargain with the people? One thing we know for sure is that while these protests may have started for varying reasons, there exists a commonality. Let me quickly go over the broad-level details of each event in 2022. About 100 people started chanting in front of the offices of Evergrande, saying, "Evergrande, return our money." Evergrande has gone bankrupt, and Chinese investors in its financial products have become aware of its current situation, so they demand their money or their apartments. The police and security unleashed violence on protesters as they chanted, "Henan banks, give me my money back." The bank has frozen the accounts of many citizens, so about 1,000 protesters took to their Zhengzhou sub-branch to demand their money. Another incident also shook China's economy as citizens stopped paying their mortgages as they knew they would not get their apartments. Citizens saw signs of bankruptcy for the Chinese developers as the real estate market was over-leveraged. As citizens threatened to stop paying mortgages, it posed a risk to China's banking sector. Fortunately, nothing tragic happened. But was this the end of the protests in China? No, it was not. The COVID restrictions caused even more protests. Starting from Seaton's Bridge one-person protest where Bridgeman blasted from the loudspeakers saying, "I want to eat, I want to be free, I want to vote, go on strike at school and work, remove the treasonous dictator Xi Jinping." Similar content was also visible on the right banner of the bridge saying, "Go on strike at school and work, remove the dictator and national traitor Xi Jinping." The banner on the left also reads, "We don't want nucleic acid testing, we want food to eat. We don't want lockdowns, we want freedom. We don't want lies, we want dignity. We don't want cultural revolution, we want reform. We don't want dictatorial leaders, we want elections. We don't want to be slaves, we want to be citizens." If you've watched to this point, it tells one thing. You enjoy watching this video. Kindly hit that like button and also subscribe to our channel. A typical response from the CCP was to censor the media against the spread of these protest messages, but it didn't stop other forthcoming protests. More problems ensued, causing further uproar. The death of the 3-year-old boy could have been avoided if not for the delayed emergency response due to movement restrictions. Although the government apologized for his death, they didn't make any amendments. Many migrant workers who reside in Haizhou were forced to protest as the government reinstated lockdowns, sending the people out of work and unable to earn sustainable income. Similarly, the Foxconn factory protests ensued as workers were threatened never to return if they left as part of the national COVID policy. The protests in China escalated and triggered people's reactions as fire engulfed a building in Urumqi, killing 10 people and injuring 9. Before the fire, the people of the Xinjiang region were already circulating videos of how they struggled to get necessities. So this fire aggravated their reactions. They blamed the strict movement restrictions for hindering the firefighters from getting to the building on time. They also faulted the government, who had nothing to do but blame the victims who escaped. Aside from that, disease control personnel publicly beat some people, and it stirred public reactions. Citizens took to the street, and a wave of protests ensued all over the country, demanding that the hazardous lockdown be ended. The crowds in Chengdu also raised their voices, saying they didn't want lifelong rulers, they didn't want emperors. With the nationwide protests in November in China, it's clear that the people want Xi and the CCP out. But is China close to a democracy? The rise in protests in China in recent years reflects the growing frustration of the people with the government's handling of various issues. Despite the risks, more and more people are taking to the streets to voice their grievances and demand change. The protests are a defining moment in the struggle for freedom and democracy in China, and the events of 2022 are a testament to the people's determination to fight for their rights. So, is this the end for Xi? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.